The overarching narrative of A Promised Land is that we can't take our democracy and the hopes that we have for the future for granted. I think that after the entirety of 2020 and even the beginning parts of 2021 during the transition of power, there's been a large desire to kind of just sit back, breathe a sigh of relief, and kind of just accept that we are where we're meant to be and that everything is fine when in fact it's not. One election doesn't solve all of our problems. We still have a long way to go, and there's always something more that we can do and that we should be doing to move closer toward the dream that is America. And I think that Obama's main premise throughout this is that after every mountain there is another mountain, and that you just have to keep working towards this dream that you have for our country.
On the surface, this is a story about one person's pursuit to understand America, to understand their conception of home, but I think on a more interesting and fundamental level, it's a story about that same person's pursuit to understand and reconcile themselves, and that sheds important light on the fact that through engaging national conversations, we can better understand who we are as people.
For me, there are two main threads throughout A Promised Land. First, Obama set out to humanize the presidency, to tell the stories of the major parts of the presidential record from a more human perspective, right? Obama as a person, we can see that through the constant graying of his hair throughout his presidency, although that's not mentioned in the book. And, humans have to make hard decisions when they're in positions of power. And then secondly, I think this one's a lot more implicit than the first one, but it was a memoir about how the inner workings of a democratic government should look, right? And we're reading this after the Capitol Hill Revolt, or whatever historians will end up calling it, right, in which the functions of democracy broke down when we had an armed group trying to overturn the result of an election. And the Obama memoir, read in context of that moment, really seems like it's offering an alternative of calm and reasoned governance, of trying to work with the other side, even though the Obama administration oftentimes knew full well that even if they did make concessions to Republicans, Republicans still wouldn't vote for their bills. But it was a testament to the idea of how a fully functioning democracy should work.
If I remain hopeful, it's because I've learned to place my faith in my fellow citizens, especially those of the next generation, whose conviction in the equal worth of all people seems to come as second nature, and who insist on making real those principles that their parents and teachers told them were true, but perhaps never fully believed themselves. More than anyone, this book is for those young people, an invitation to once again remake the world, and to bring about, through hard work, determination, and a big dose of imagination, an America that finally aligns with all that is best in us.
My favorite quote is pretty early on in the book. It's when Obama's recounting, an early campaign trail experience in Illinois, and he talks about, the sensation of seeing the crowd, and he says, "Your voice creeps right up to the edge of cracking, because for an instant you feel them deeply, you can see them whole."
I think this answer really fits in with Obama's theme about humanizing the presidency. I think my favorite quote, and certainly the most memorable quote to me, was when one of Obama's advisors tells him that he just won the Nobel Prize. And Obama says, "Wait for what?" Right? Obama certainly knew there's a lot of criticism for him for winning the Nobel Prize, and I think he too shared in some of that skepticism of that effort. And I think it really, the quote really just humanized him as a person. He's not just some presidential machine, he's a person in an office.
I started reading this book following the insurrection invasion, however you'd like to call it, at the Capitol building in January. And that put me in a position, if I wasn't already, in a very cynical state of mind. And I think that it's been something that was building inside me over the past 4 years of the Donald Trump presidency, just questioning everything that teachers, parents, friends had even claimed about what America really is and what we stand for. And after reading A Promised Land, I feel that my hope and my faith in that promise was in some ways restored. Not necessarily because I believe that every person that we elect will do what they've promised, or that we have heroes per se hidden among the younger generations or older generations, but that our democracy is stronger than any enemies or any people who may not want to live up to its original promise, and that we can persevere in spite of the racism, xenophobia, sexism, homophobia that persists in our country. We can eventually, if not soon, we can see the promised land that Obama is talking about.
Definitely, for me, the most interesting part of the narrative was his recurrent emphasis on the fact that no one ever operates alone, right? You know, everyone is shaped or buoyed or influenced in some way by the ideas and the stories of those around them. And I guess, you know, that can work on a personal level, but it also connects to the ways in which nations and entire systems of thought interact with each other.
Personally, I learned that I don't think I ever want to seek elective office, to be completely honest. Like, I know a lot of Harvard kids in the public service realm know right now that they want to run for election. But I think, honestly, like, seeing the anguish that the president, like, I don't use that word lightly, the anguish that the president, that especially running for the presidency, put on Obama and his family, right, is something that I don't think should be taken lightly. And so, you know, I don't think that I could ever put me or my future family through anything like that.
I didn't really feel any more connected to any political figures, but it was nice to see quite a few mentions of people from my home state of Kansas mentioned. Additionally, I think hearing about and seeing Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, people like that in the everyday news as legislators is one experience, but to actually see them weaving in and out of a person's life like you get to see with Obama's life in this book is really interesting and provides a different positionality almost.
By a long shot, one of my favorite characters in this book was Obama's political consultant, David Axelrod. I'd seen him on TV a bunch of times, but I don't think I ever really understood his approach to a relationship with politics, and I definitely really appreciated, you know, his combination of pointed cynicism, but also this, you know, deep-seated conviction in democratic values.
Honestly, I felt like I learned a little bit more about George W. Bush when reading the book. I think in my family, George W. Bush is often portrayed as like a neoliberal villain, and Obama doesn't portray Bush like that, right? Obama portrays Bush as a reasonable interlocutor, a reasonable intermediary when Obama and what was the president-elect, or when Obama was even just running for president, and he and Bush were negotiating to get the economy back on track, even though Obama hadn't yet become president. You know, in those sections, Bush was quite reasonable. So I think my perspective on Bush as a person and as a politician definitely changed.
One thing that I would tell people who are considering reading A Promised Land is to take your time. Obama isn't one to rush, as is apparent in the 700 pages that are volume 1 alone. But also this story isn't one that is meant to be rushed through, and I think that's part of the point. Our media often glosses over things, sticks to the headlines. With our reduced attention spans, oftentimes it's just 5-second bites, small pieces, but you don't really get the full story with those sorts of things. So Obama really does focus on the nitty-gritty of the experiences that he's lived through and that he had to lead through. And I think that's an important part of the experience. And so I think that reading this is really an exercise in reflection and taking your time.
My advice to anyone who wants to read A Promised Land is don't think about length. This is a giant of a book, but Obama is such an eloquent and, incisive and self-possessed writer that even just reading one line, one paragraph, one page is enough to make it a really deeply meaningful experience. And most importantly, have fun and good luck.
Honestly, I don't really read a lot of political biographies, so I wasn't quite sure what to expect in A Promised Land. I think a little bit wary. I think a lot of presidential memoirs read like Ulysses Grant's presidential memoir tend to be super self-serving and super defensive. Obama's memoir wasn't self-serving and it wasn't defensive. It reads well also. I think even if you disagree with him, you'll find some value in at least learning the reasoning as to why he made his decisions. Again, you don't have to agree with it, but I think he explains them well without too much defensiveness and in a manner that's very readable for a general audience and something that's very accessible for a general audience.